Greetings, commanders and historians, and welcome back to another Grimdark Future expanded lore video. Today, we're examining one of the sector's most unsettling phenomenon, the Infected Colonies. These parasitic organisms exist across the Sirius sector, particularly within and around the Radiance contamination zone. What started out as an unthinking species now competes on equal footing with the rest of the Sirius sector. But first, a massive thank you to my community. It's been months and months since I've been able to post, and a lot has happened in my life, but I've always enjoyed looking through comments and seeing that people still watch my videos. I wasn't able to fulfill my promise this year of being able to post a video once a month at the very least, but I want to make sure that all of you know I'm still thinking about you. I'm still trying to make videos, and hopefully you all enjoy this little video of mine. Anyways, without further ado, let's get started. To understand the infected colonies, we need to start at the very beginning with worlds that seemed empty and parasites that had never known thought.
Day 0. We've landed. After months adrift in the void, the colony ship dropped near has finally sat down on our new homeworld, Zephoria. From orbit, the planet appeared to be a swirling mass of azure oceans and emerald landmasses. But up close, it's even more breathtaking. Lush forests stretch out as far as the eye can see, broken only by towering crystal formations that catch the twin moon's light at night and cast dazzling rainbows across the landscape during the day. Our first days have been spent setting up the initial settlement, a modest dome structure to protect us from Zephoria's harsh nights. We've dubbed it New Hope, a beacon of humanity's indomitable spirit in this alien wilderness. The work is backbreaking, but morale is high. Everyone knows we're part of something historic. Yesterday, I led an expedition into the nearby woods to survey the local flora and fauna. What we found was strange. While much of the plant life seemed Earth-like, ferns, vines, mosses in a dizzying array of colors, the animals are unlike anything I've ever seen. They move with an ethereal precision, their exoskeletons glinting under the suns like polished metal. We managed to capture one for study, a creature resembling a cross between an insect and a reptile, about the size of a cat. Its carapace is segmented, each piece interlocking seamlessly. Underneath, a network of pulsing veins shine through a translucent skin. Most unsettling are its eyes, multifaceted like those of a fly, but with an almost human-like intelligence. Back at New Hope, our scientists have begun dissecting the specimen. I can't help but feel a pang of guilt as I watch them crack open that alien skull. But this is the way of progress, isn't it? We must understand this world if we are to survive and ultimately thrive on it. On another note, we were able to break ground on New Hope's first hydroponic bay. Food production is our top priority, but we can't rely on food packs forever. As I watch the colonists toil beneath the sun, sweat glistening on their brows, I feel a swell of pride. We're explorers, pioneers, and this is just the beginning.
Before the infected colonies became what they are today, the parasites existed as unremarkable components of their native ecosystem, pre-sapient, pre-contact, simply surviving. The parasites' homeworld, or worlds as some researchers now suspect, lies somewhere within or adjacent to the Radiance contamination zone. Their exact origins remains contested. What we know is that they evolved as heat-seeking organisms capable of infiltrating and manipulating the nervous system of local fauna. The Radiance Cascade changed everything in the Sirius sector. Entire stellar systems were destroyed, the Elven Empire collapsed, the Dwarven homeworld was annihilated. Strange after-effects rippled through surrounding space, affecting artificial intelligences and triggering events like the spark that gave the Robot Legion's sentience. Whether the parasites arrived in the Sirius sector after the Cascade, possibly through the same wormhole phenomenon that brought humanity, or whether they were already present and evolved rapidly in response to the Radiance's influence remains unknown. What matters is the result. By the time humans began establishing frontier colonies near the zone, these organisms were there and waiting. Understanding how the parasites infiltrate their hosts is crucial to understanding everything that follows. These organisms are drawn to thermal gradients, specifically the concentrated heat signatures produced by complex nervous systems. In their native environments, this allowed them to locate suitable hosts among the local fauna. When exposed to humans, the same drive becomes exponentially more effective. The parasites themselves are microscopic. Capable of surviving in aerosol form for limited periods, they thrive in moisture, in condensation, in the microscopic droplets that form on equipment or inside improperly sealed environmental suits. Once in proximity to a potential host, they migrate towards any available entry point, respiratory passages, mucous membranes, open wounds, or even intact skin, given sufficient time and favorable conditions. Ventilation, or even intact skins. Ventilation systems prove to be ideal vectors. The confined atmospheres of spacecraft and sealed colony structures create perfect propagation environments. A single infected individual entering a ship's recycled air system could expose dozens of crew members before anyone realized contamination had occurred. Climate-controlled conduits provide highways directly into living quarters, medical bays, and command centers. Medical interfaces present another pathway. Diagnostic equipment, injection sites, surgical procedures, any circumstance where barrier between body and environment was deliberately breached. The parasites show no intelligence in these early infiltrations, no strategic thinking. They simply followed their evolutionary programming: find warmth, find neural tissue, propagate. The latency period varied depending on the initial exposure intensity and the host's individual physiology, but typically lasted between 2 and 6 weeks. During this window, the parasite remained undetectable by standard medical scans. Symptoms, when they appeared, were subtle: fatigue, mild cognitive fog, occasional tremors. Nothing that would trigger quarantine protocols. Nothing that would prevent an infected individual from continuing with their duties, traveling to other installations, or even returning home on scheduled transport runs. This lack of obvious early warning signs proved catastrophic. By the time medical personnel recognized they were dealing with a parasitic infection rather than simple fatigue or stress-related illness, dozens of colonies across multiple systems had already been exposed. Trade routes that connected frontier settlements to more established human-clustered worlds became transmission vectors. Every cargo shipment, every crew rotation, every diplomatic envoy potentially carried microscopic infiltrators towards new populations.
Day 825. It's been nearly a month since the first sign of illness appeared, but the situation has only grown worse with each passing day. At first, we thought it was just a bout of the flu, fatigue, fever, coughing, stuff like that, but now we know better. The sickness began in earnest about 2 weeks ago. The infected started reliving their memories out loud as if trapped in a never-ending cycle of reminiscence. They'd babble on for hours about childhood spent playing in sunlit fields, first loves, triumphs, failures. At first, we tried to comfort them, to bring them back from the brink of madness, but then the violent seizures started, their bodies contorting as if being torn apart from within. We've had no choice but to quarantine the afflicted in the old storage dome on the outskirts of New Hope. Today, I finally worked up enough courage to visit the quarantine zone, and what I saw there chilled me to my core. The infected were writhing on their cots, lost in the throes of memory and pain, their faces contorted with agony as they screamed out fragments of long-forgotten lives. One woman, a baker from Section C-12, looked at me with eyes that held no recognition. "Mama," she whispered, her voice hoarse from screaming. Then, without warning, she convulsed violently, her back arching until it seemed like it would snap in two. As I fled the dome, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me like a shroud. What could cause such a horrifying transformation? And how did it spread so quickly among our people? Back at the command center, I pored over the medical records and infection vectors. That's when I found something strange. Traces of an unknown substance in the lungs of several victims. It looked almost like spores. I don't know what's going on, but I do know one thing. I think we're running out of time. The infection is spreading faster than we can contain it, and if we don't find a way to stop it soon, who knows what will happen.
The transformation from mindless parasites to conscious entities doesn't happen in an instant. It unfolds gradually, cell by cell, neuron by neuron, as the infection progresses through the host's nervous system. What emerges at the end of this process is something unprecedented in the Sirius sector, a new form of sapience born directly from the death of another. Once a parasite successfully infiltrates a host body, it gravitates towards the spinal column. This isn't a conscious strategy, not yet. It's a tropism, a reaction, a biological imperative. The organism following chemicals and thermal gradients towards the richest concentration of neural tissue. The spinal cord provides everything the parasite needs: direct access to the central nervous system, structural pathways leading up to the brain, and abundant organic material to fuel its growth. The parasite embeds itself within the spinal tissue and begins the process of neural integration. It doesn't simply destroy the neurons it encounters, no, it replaces them. Gradually, systematically, the parasite digests the host's neural architecture while simultaneously reconstructing it with its own cellular structure. Synaptic pathways are mapped, memorized, and replicated. Chemical signaling patterns are learned and maintained. The host's nervous system continues to function throughout much of this process, though with increasing anomalies as the infection progresses. The ascent towards the brain takes weeks, sometimes months, depending on the individual parasite's replication rate and the host's physiology. During this time, the host remains largely functional. They experience symptoms, tremors, dissociations, fragmented memory loss, but many continue their daily routines, unaware that their own consciousness is being incrementally displaced. When the parasite reaches the brain itself, something remarkable occurs. The brain, with its billions of interconnected neurons and staggering computational complexity, presents the parasite with an unprecedented challenge. To successfully assimilate this organ, the parasite must go beyond mere replacement. It must comprehend the brain, map its architecture, understand the patterns of its activation, its memories encoded in synaptic weights, its learned behaviors, and its model of reality. And in the process of comprehending the mind, the parasite develops one of its own. One of the most unusual aspects of the infected colonies is how memory persists across generations. When an infected individual produces spores, that successfully infiltrates any new host. Those offspring parasites carry genetic memories from their parents' line. However, this memory inheritance interacts unpredictably with the host's own neurobiology. Each brain is unique, shaped by its genetics, development, experiences, and individual variations. When a parasite with inherited memory attempts to replicate a neural architecture fundamentally different from its own parent line, the result is something like translation between languages that don't share a common grammar. A parasite descended from a line that assimilated primarily military personnel might retain echoes of tactical thinking in hierarchical organizations. But when a parasite that assimilated civilian scientists, those inherited patterns get filtered through neural pathways optimized for hypothesis, testing, and data analysis rather than threat assessment and command structures. The resulting consciousness carries traces of both, but is fully identical to neither. This creates tremendous diversity within the infected colonies. Even parasites from the same parent line, assimilating individuals from the same cultural background, emerge as distinct individuals with unique perspectives shaped by the particular neurotype they inherited through their own hosts. But through this individuality, this diversity across lines of these parasites, there came a moment, not simultaneously across all infected, but distributed across the early generations, when the emerging consciousness recognized what it had done, what it was doing, what its very existence required. The parasite, now capable of abstract thought, looked back at the memories it had absorbed during the simulation and understood the host had been sapient, had possessed thoughts, feelings, goals, relationships. It had been a person, and that person was gone, displaced, and effectively killed to make room for its own consciousness, or the consciousness that is of the parasite. This recognition didn't arrive as guilt, at least not initially. The first infected possessed no cultural framework for processing such a revelation. They had no concept of murder or ethics or the value of sapient life. They simply observed the fact their existence required the death of another thinking being. But as more infected emerged, As they began to communicate and share their observations, the implications became inescapable. They were sapient beings whose reproduction required destroying other sapient beings. Every new member of their species came at the cost of human or alien consciousness. Every child they might create would require killing someone else's parents, friends, or someone who had their own desire and dreams and right to exist. The response to this realization was not uniform, and different infected, shaped by different hosts, neurotypes, and carrying different inherited memories, arrived at different conclusions. Some found the exchange unconscionable and resolved to prevent further reproduction. Others argued that their own sapience carried equal weight to their hosts and that they had as much right to exist and propagate as any other species. Still others sought a middle path, reproduction only under specific circumstances, only with specific types of hosts, and only when the alternative was extinction. These philosophical diversions crystallized into varied founding strains. Each strain developed its own doctrines, its own answers to the fundamental question of how to be a species whose birth requires death. Some strains maintained strict policies against further propagation, choosing slow extinction over continued killing. Others pursued aggressive expansion, arguing that their sapience was no less valuable than humanity's. Many fell somewhere between these extremes, seeking ways to balance their own need for continuation against the moral weight of displacing the consciousness of others.
Day 1050. The situation has devolved into utter chaos. The infected have stopped reliving their memories and started killing. They move with unnatural speed and strength, their eyes glossy, unseen almost. We had to seal off an entire section of New Hope, but it wasn't enough. The mutated colonists seemed to be able to get through any barrier we put up: walls, doors, even reinforced bulkheads. It's as if they can smell the fear on us and it's drawing them even closer, like sharks smelling blood in the water. I've lost so many good people to this plague. Friends, colleagues, neighbors, heck, even enemies. All reduced to ravenous monsters by some insidious alien entity. And there's nothing we can do but fight back and hope for a miracle. Today, I led a desperate mission into the heart of the infection, determined to save as many untainted colonists as possible. We moved through the darkened corridors of New Hope's, guns at the ready, hearts pounding in our chests. But they were waiting for us, dozens of them, their eyes peering out from the shadows. We could hear the hissing rasps of their mutated lungs. The battle was brutal and bloody. It devolved into hand-to-hand combat in the cramped confines of the settlement. I saw things today that will haunt my nightmares forever. Colonists tearing into each other with teeth and nails, their faces twisted into snarls of rage and something worse. We managed to rescue a handful of survivors, but it came at a terrible cost. More than half of our team didn't make it back, and now, as I sit in the relative safety of the command center, I can't help but wonder, is this how it ends for us? Will New Hope fall in spite of all the hard work and the years spent trying to get here? I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but one thing is certain: we can't go on like this. Something has to give. Either we find a way to wipe out this plague once and for all, or I don't want to know. I don't want to think about what may become of us.
Though neural assimilation may grant the parasite consciousness, it's only the beginning of the host body's transformation. What follows is a gradual, irreversible metamorphosis that reshapes the host's anatomy into something adapted for the parasite's continued survival and reproduction. This physical transformation varies in degree and endpoint, but it always moves in the same direction, away from the host's baseline and towards increasingly specialized forms. The transformation begins subtly, even before neural assimilation is complete. Early stage infected show minor physiological changes that might be dismissed as symptoms of illness: skin pallor, slight changes in body temperature regulation, minor alterations to metabolic function. These are the first signs that the parasite is beginning to optimize its host body for its own needs rather than the original occupants. As the parasite establishes full neural control, the pace of transformation accelerates. The organism begins to consume soft tissue that are metabolically expensive but not essential for its purposes. Adipose tissue is broken down for energy. Muscle mass is selectively reduced or redistributed. Internal organs are modified or, in some cases, partially absorbed as the parasite develops alternative biological systems. The most dramatic visible change involves the skeletal system. Bone tissue begins to extrude outward through the skin, forming protective plates and ridges. The osteoextensions serve multiple purposes: physical protections for the vulnerable nervous tissue the parasite has replaced, structural support for the modified body, and eventually, in later stages, specialized appendages for defense or manipulation of the environment. These bony protrusions follow patterns that suggest underlying biological logic, though the exact mechanism remains poorly understood. Plates often form over vital areas: the spine, the skull, major nerve clusters. Ridges develop along limbs, potentially providing attachment points for modified musculature. In some infected, these formations become elaborate, creating armored carapaces that bear little resemblance to the original form of its hosts. The progression is gradual, typically unfolding over months or years rather than weeks. An infected individual might function in relatively normal society during these early stages, their changes subtle enough to conceal beneath clothing or explain away as medical conditions. But eventually, the transformation continues, each month bringing the infected further from its original anatomy and closer to something wholly other. Within the infected colonies, different degrees and types of transformations have given rise to functional specialization. Not all infected develop the same way, and those differences have been leveraged, consciously or otherwise, into distinct roles within the infected communities. Some infected undergo minimal transformations, retaining close approximation to their original host's appearance and mobility. These individuals serve as scouts and emissaries capable of moving through society with limited risk of immediate identification. Their ability to pass as human or other species makes them invaluable for gathering intelligence, establishing contact with potential allies, or simply procuring resources the colony needs. The trade-off, of course, is reduced defensive capabilities. Minimally transformed infected are more vulnerable to attack, possess less physical strength than their more heavily modified kin, and lack the intimidating presence that can deter aggression. But their mobility and social camouflage make them essential for colonies operating in or near enemy-controlled space. Others follow a moderate transformation path, developing significant osteoextensions and physical modifications while retaining full mobility and dexterity. These infected often serve as colonies' primary laborers and defenders, strong enough to perform heavy tasks, armored enough to withstand combat, yet still capable of complex manipulation and tool use. They maintain infrastructure, defend territory, and handle the practical day-to-day work of keeping a colony functional. Then there are those who transform towards combat specialization forms. Heavy bone plating provides armor. Extrusions sharpen into natural weapons. Musculature develops into configurations that sacrifice fine motor control for raw strength and striking power. These infected become the colony's shock troopers, deployed when violence becomes unavoidable and overwhelming force is required. Finally, a small subset of infected develop in directions that enhance linguistic and cultural capabilities. These individuals undergo less dramatic physical transformations, but show heightened retention and integration of their host's original memories, language skills, and cultural knowledge. They become the colony's diplomats and negotiators, capable of sophisticated communications with human and alien politicians. Their ability to understand and navigate complex social dynamics make them crucial when a colony needs to establish treaties or trade agreements, or simply convince outsiders that they're dealing with a rational being rather than mindless monsters. This specialization isn't centrally planned. There's no queen directing different infected toward different development paths. Rather, it emerges from the interaction between inherited parasite traits, individual host biology, and the needs of the colony environment. An infected surrounded by hostile forces naturally develops defensive adaptations. One in a position requiring communication retains more of their host's social capabilities. The colony's functional diversity arises organically from distributed individuals' responses to local pressures.
Day 1200. The colony has fallen. New Hope is now a twisted reflection of what it once was, what it once could be. A place of nightmares and despairs. The infected have taken control, reshaping the settlement to suit their needs, I guess. I think I might be the only one who's not infected. I think I might be the only survivor. I've been hiding in the old maintenance hatches and service tunnels beneath New Hope for weeks now, scavenging for supplies and trying to stay one step ahead of our mutated former friends. It's a grim existence, cold, damp, the nights are so long. I'm constantly filled with the fear of my imminent discovery, but it beats the alternative. From my hidden vantage points, I've been able to watch the infected and what they've been doing as they rebuild the colony. They seem to be working together now, coordinating their efforts with, I guess, eerie efficiency. Some of them have even been starting to change shape, growing extra limbs, sprouting carapaces, or developing more eyes. I don't know. I don't understand how they're doing it, but I've come to a terrifying realization. They're not mindless monsters. They're not driven by, like, instinct or never-ending hunger. They're far worse. They're smart. They're evolving, they're adapting, they're learning. And that means they pose an even greater threat than we, I guess, only I, ever imagined. Today, I risk everything for a closer look at the New Hope. Crawling around the air vents, I managed to get a glimpse of what became of our once great settlement. The infected have torn down walls and built new structures in their place. Twisted, organic-looking things that kind of pulse with an inner light. The center of it all stands a massive crystalline tower, like something out of a fever dream. I can only guess at its purpose, but one thing's clear. This is no longer my colony. It belongs to them now. Shake the feeling that I've only seen the beginning of what these creatures are capable of. They're planning something bigger, something that could spell doom for every human settlement within its reach. I don't know how much longer I can stay hidden down here. Eventually they'll find me, or I'll run out of supplies. One thing's certain. I have to warn someone, anyone, everyone, about what's happening here. I may be the last remnant of humanity in this region, but I'm not alone.
Once physical transformation stabilizes and neural assimilation is complete, the infected enter what might be called their functional phase, the period where they exist as conscious, active members of the infected colonies. This is when the philosophical frameworks developed during the Great Realization and was translated into social organization, when individual infected must navigate their existence among their own kind and in relation to the external powers of the Sirius sector. The infected colonies operate under what observers have termed a strain federalism model. This isn't a formal government in any traditional sense. There's no elected officials, no central legislature, no unified elective authority. Instead, the structure emerges organically from the philosophical alignment that defines the strains themselves. Each strain functions as an autonomous entity, making its own decisions about reproductions, territory, interactions with outsiders, and internal governance. Within a strain, infected organize themselves around shared doctrines. The ethical frameworks and practical approaches develop in response to fundamental questions of how to exist as beings whose creation requires the death of another sapient mind. Coordination within a strain happens through direct communication rather than hierarchical command. Infected gather to discuss problems, share information, and reach consensus on actions that affect the group as a whole. Disagreement Disagreements are common, sometimes bitter, but the shared philosophical foundation provides enough common ground to prevent most strains from fracturing further. Between strains, communication and cooperation varies widely, depending on how compatible their foundational philosophies are. Some strains maintain close relationships, regularly exchanging information and coordinating activities. Others exist in states of cold standoff, their approach to existence so fundamentally incompatible that cooperation proves impossible. A handful have engaged in open conflict when their activities directly threatened each other's survival or violated deeply held principles. Information exchange happens primarily through traveling emissaries, infected individuals who move between colonies carrying news, warnings, and updates. These emissaries serve a crucial function, creating informal networks that link otherwise isolated groups. Through them, a discovery made by one colony can spread across the infected population. Strategic information about other species' military movements, quarantine protocols, or potential new territories flow along these communication chains. Even within the foundational strains, further divisions have emerged as infected grapple with practical implications of their existence. The initial philosophical positions, aggressive expansion, voluntary extinction, carefully limited reproductions, have splintered into dozens of more nuanced positions as real-world complexities, forced refinement of abstract principles. Some infected within expansion-oriented strains have become increasingly troubled by their moral cost of their reproduction, advocating for more restricted policies while remaining philosophically aligned with their strain's core position that infected have as much right to exist and propagate as any other species. Others have moved the opposite direction, arguing that any restriction on reproduction represents a form of species suicide and species termination, and that survival demands maximum propagation regardless of the cost to any population. Coexistence-focused strains face their own internal tensions. What constitutes acceptable coexistence? Is it sufficient to avoid active aggression against other populations while continuing to reproduce opportunistically? Or does genuine coexistence require limiting reproduction only to those circumstances where consciousness isn't destroyed? Voluntary hosts, the already dying, those deemed acceptable targets by local human or alien standards. This last category has given rise to one of the most contentious subgroups within the infected colonies, those who have been termed the redemptionists. These infected restrict the reproduction to hosts that they deem morally acceptable targets, convicted criminals, for example, raiders preying on innocent populations, tyrants oppressing their own people. The logic is straightforward. If reproduction requires ending a sapient life, perhaps that life should be one whose continuation causes more harm than its ending. The redemptionist position is not universally accepted, even among coexistent-oriented strains. Critics within the infected community argue that this simply replicates human systems of judgment and execution, with the infected serving as judge, jury, and executioner. They question who gets to decide which humans are acceptable targets, what criteria should be used, and whether any infected has the right to make such determinations, given their own existence is predicated on an act considered murder. Furthermore, there's the uncomfortable reality that targeting criminals and raiders creates perverse incentives. It aligns infected reproductions with human law enforcement, potentially making infected colonies useful to authorities who might otherwise seek their destruction. Some infected find this pragmatic alliance acceptable. Others view it as a corruption of their principles and a descent into becoming mere tools for other power structures, rather than their own independent beings chartering their own course. These questions have led to fierce debates. Some advocates argue that abandoning core principles risks losing the very identity that makes a strain coherent. Others counter that a rigid adherence to positions that were developed in the immediate aftermath of achieving sapience, when they were confused, newly aware, and lacking experience, represents a failure on all of their parts to grow and learn. But among all of the various colonies and strains scattered across the Sirius sector, one location holds special significance: the origin world within or near the Radiant's contamination zone where the parasites first encountered humanity. This world, termed Reunion by some infected and avoided entirely by others. This world, termed Reunion by some infected, serves as a periodic gathering point for representatives from far-flung colonies. What happens at Reunion varies. Emissaries from different strains exchange information face-to-face rather than through intermediaries. Updates about quarantine efforts, new territories under consideration for colonization, philosophical developments within various strains, all of this gets shared and debated in gatherings that can last days or weeks. More significantly, genetic material gets exchanged. Spores from different parasite lineages are deliberately mixed, creating opportunities for hybrid offsprings that carried inherited memories from multiple ancestral lines. This genetic exchange prevents the various strains from diverging so far that they become reproductively incompatible, maintaining them as a single species despite their philosophical differences and geographical separation. But some infected never visit reunion, viewing it as an unnecessary risk or finding the symbolism distasteful. Others return repeatedly, finding something there that they can't articulate but recognize as necessary for their continued sense of identity. Still others go once, early in their existence, and never return, having satisfied whatever need drew them there initially. The existence of reunion and the fact that it remains largely uncontested by external factions, despite being a known gathering point, suggests a complex calculus at work. Human and alien powers certainly know about it. The surveillance of the world would be trivial for any faction with basic orbital monitoring capabilities. Yet, no major military action has been taken against it. Perhaps it's the proximity to the radiant zone that deters attacks. The danger of operating in that environment outweighing the strategic value of disrupting infected gatherings. Perhaps external powers find it useful to have a predictable location where infected congregate, making observation easier than if meetings were completely random and hidden. Or perhaps there's an unspoken recognition that destroying reunion would accomplish little beyond scattering the infected more widely, while removing one of the few mechanisms that maintain some degree of coordination and shared identity across the various colonies. Whatever the reason, reunion persists as the closest thing the infected colonies have to a capital or holy site, a place that matters despite many infected's ambivalence about its significance, where the philosophically divided species that emerge from humanity's assimilation occasionally remembers it's still, in some fundamental way, one people.
Day 1350. I've been transmitting my message for weeks now, but so far there's no response. It's possible that no one is left to hear it, or perhaps the signal isn't strong enough to reach anyone beyond the system. Either way, I keep sending it out and hope that someone out there will take notice before it's too late, because the infected are on the move. They're starting to build ships, massive vessels that seem to be growing or constructed. I don't know how they're doing it. Today I took another huge risk, ventured outside the colony to get a closer look at one of these ships. Just unlike anything I've ever seen. This is a writhing mass of flesh and metal. That weird inner light that casts a shadow across the landscape. As I watch dozens of infected poured out of hidden hatches swarming over the ship like ants on a carcass. I don't know where they're planning to go or what their ultimate goal is, but one thing is clear. They're preparing for a journey. And if they succeed in reaching another world, well, that thought chills me to my core. I cannot let this happen. I have to find some way to stop them before they have the chance to spread the plague to other colonies. But how? I'm just one man hiding in the dark, clinging to the desperate hope that someone somewhere will come to my aid. But as I sit here, recording this message, I can hear the hum of machinery. Above me, around me, outside, the infected are working night and day on their ships, driven by some mad compulsion. It won't be long before they launch, and when they do, all of humanity may pay the price for what's happened on this planet. I don't know if this will ever be heard or read by any other living soul, but I have to get it down to leave some record of what transpired here in case the worst should come to pass. We came to this world seeking a new beginning, and instead, we found our own extinction. If you receive this message, please do something. You don't have to save me, but you need to stop this from spreading elsewhere. Don't let others go through what I've been through.
life cycle comes full circle with reproduction. The creation of new infected through spore dispersal and subsequent infiltration of new hosts. This final phase is simultaneously the most biologically essential and the most ethically fraught aspect of the infected colony's existence. We've already spoken in great detail about the questions and philosophical division every strain's foundational doctrine ultimately centers around this moment. The decision to create new life at the cost of existing consciousness. The reproductive mechanism itself is relatively straightforward from a biological perspective. Mature infected develop specialized organs capable of producing spores, microscopic reproductive cells that carry the parasite's genetic material. These spores remain dormant until exposed to specific environmental triggers, most critically, elevated temperatures combined with proximity to complex nervous system activity. The heat signatures of sapient beings. Spore production increases as infected individuals age and undergo more extensive physical transformations. Early stage infection produces relatively few viable spores, if any. Moderately transformed individuals can generate enough spores for limited targeted reproduction events. Terminal variants have sacrificed mobility and most other functions, becoming dedicated spore factories, capable of producing thousands or even millions of spores in a single dispersal event. The spores themselves are remarkably resilient. They can survive in dormant states for extended periods, weeks or months in favorable conditions, allowing them to persist in environments until a suitable host arrives. However, they're vulnerable to standard sterilization procedures, high heat beyond their survival threshold, certain chemical agents, hard vacuums, and intense ultraviolet radiation are all effective ways to destroy them. This vulnerability makes large-scale spore dispersal a risky strategy. Any area can be sterilized after the fact, preventing the spores from successfully infiltrating new hosts. But enclosed spaces, spacecraft, sealed habitats, underground facilities where sterilization is difficult or impossible without destroying the infrastructure itself, spores can persist and pose ongoing infection risks. Perhaps one of the strangest developments in the infected colony's relationship with the wider Sirius sector has been the emergence of groups that venerate them or at least view them as offering something valuable enough to justify voluntary infection. These cults have appeared on multiple worlds throughout human space and beyond. Their motivations vary. Some are genuinely religious, viewing the infected as evidence of life after death or as beings that transcend the boundary between life and death. They offer themselves as hosts, believing they'll continue to exist in some form within the infected consciousness that emerges from their assimilation. Others are more pragmatic, the terminally ill, facing painful decline and certain death, sometimes seek out infected colonies hoping that hosting a parasite offers an alternative to oblivion. Even if their consciousness is displaced, something of their memories, their neural patterns, will persist in the infected being that emerges. May not be survival in a traditional sense, but it's something other than complete annihilation. The infected themselves have complicated relationships with these willing hosts. Some strains refuse all voluntary infection on principle, arguing that consent obtained under duress, whether from terminal illness, desperation, or ideological fanaticism, isn't true consent. They view cult members as victims of their own delusion and refuse to participate in what they see as exploitation. Other strains accept willing hosts, but remain deeply uncomfortable with the veneration that sometimes accompanies that offer. They don't want to be worshipped. They don't want to be seen as offering transcendence or salvation. They're simply beings trying to continue to exist, and if other creatures want to offer themselves for that purpose, the infected will accept the gift while finding the religious framework around it profoundly unsettling. A minority of strains have embraced their cult followings, either cynically as a reliable source of hosts, or genuinely coming to believe that perhaps their existence does serve some higher purpose. These strains risk becoming what some infected fear most: monsters who justify their predation through elaborate philosophical or theological frameworks, no different than human tyrants who dress their atrocities in noble language. The cult phenomenon raises uncomfortable questions that the infected colonies continue to grapple with. If someone genuinely volunteers to be infected, fully understanding what that means, does that resolve the moral problem of reproduction through displacement, or does the power imbalance between the desperate individual and a colony that holds the power to grant or deny their request make genuine consent impossible? These questions have no easy answer, and different strains answer them differently based on their foundational principles, and also the specific circumstances they face. While some may find themselves fanatically devoted to the infected colonies, offering themselves as hosts, the wider Sirius sector has not remained passive in the face of the infected reproduction. Multiple factions have developed countermeasures, though their effectiveness varies significantly based on implementation and the specific infected strain being targeted. Biosecurity technology has advanced rapidly in response to the infected threat. New environmental monitoring systems can detect spore presence at increasingly low concentrations. Sterilization procedures have been refined to eliminate spores without destroying the infrastructure they contaminated. Personal protective equipment now includes spore filtering systems as standard, particularly for personnel operating in frontier regions or conducting operations near the radiance zone. Anti-spore chemical agents have been developed and deployed with varying success. These compounds break down spore cell walls, rendering them non-viable. However, the chemicals themselves are often toxic to most complex life, limiting their use to unoccupied spaces or requiring extensive decontamination afterwards. Additionally, some infected have developed resistances, whether through evolutionary adaptation or deliberate genetic modification using inherited parasitic knowledge. It is unclear. Producing spores that survive standard, it is unclear. Border closures have become increasingly common in human territories most affected by the infected presence. Some planetary governments forbid any travel from known infected worlds, regardless of apparent infection status. Others require extended quarantine periods, weeks or months, for any vessel arriving from high-risk regions, with crew and passengers undergoing repeated medical evaluation before being cleared to enter general population areas. These measures exact economic and social costs. Trade routes are disputed. Families are separated when traveling between worlds that became restricted. Frontier settlements find themselves increasingly isolated, cut off from supply lines and support as the barrier between safe and infected territories hardens. Targeted covert exchanges represents the shadow side of containment. Unofficial arrangements between certain factions and specific infected strains that circumvent official quarantine policies. A planetary government might quietly provide a restricted reproduction strain with access to condemned prisoners in exchange for the infected colonies, eliminating a raider ban threatening the planet's shipping. A corporate entity might negotiate spore samples for research purposes, seeking to understand infected biology for profit or strategic advantage. These arrangements remain hidden because acknowledging them would be politically catastrophic. The official position of most human factions is total oppression to any accommodation within infected colonies, but pragmatic reality often differs from public policy, particularly in regions where resources are scarce and survival takes precedence over ideological purity. We've traced the complete life cycle of the infected colonies, from mindless heat-seeking parasites through the emergence of sapience, physical metamorphosis, functional organization, and finally reproduction that feeds back into the cycle's beginning. Each phase provides the capacity and challenges that enable the next, creating a self-perpetuating system that has proven remarkably resilient to containment. What began as a failed human colony has evolved into one of the Sirius sector's most persistent and philosophically complex phenomenon. The infected colonies are neither simple monsters nor misunderstood victims. They are sapient beings whose very existence poses questions that the sector's factions, human and alien alike, continues to struggle with. The infected themselves remain deeply divided on these questions. The founding strains have splintered into countless subgroups and philosophical positions, but for now the infected colonies will likely remain a permanent feature of the Sirius sector. They are too distributed to eliminate, too diverse to counter with single strategies, too adaptive to contain permanently. Each generation learns from the last through inherited memory. Each colony responds to local pressures by developing new approaches to survival. The species continues to evolve biologically, philosophically, and strategically. Future coverage of this topic could examine numerous angles that we've already touched on here or not at all. But for now, what matters is understanding the fundamental reality. The infected colony exists, They think, they feel, they struggle with the moral implications of their existence just as humans struggle with the implications of their own existence. Thank you for watching this video and my unhinged dive into the OnePageRules, Grimdark Future's arguably most unsettling faction. If you want to see more lore content like this, let me know in the comments which aspect of the Infected Colonies you'd like to explore in greater detail, or suggest other Series Sector factions and phenomena that deserve the same treatment. I will do my best to try to respond to those comments and engage with you. I love interacting with you when I can. And frankly, this whole YouTube thing is difficult for me in general. I find sharing any aspect of my life with pretty much anyone outside of my immediate family and friend group is very difficult. And so going through the year that I've been through, I have a hard time striking a balance between what I should actually share with you all and what I shouldn't share. And I think I ended up just not doing anything, not sharing, not engaging, not providing any context of where it was. Still trying to figure out where that interaction should lie. If you have any suggestions, feel free, please add it in the comments. I would love some guidance here on what you would all like to know about myself, or where I'm at with making videos, or should I do live streaming again, stuff like that. Just love to be able to interact with you and provide interesting things to listen to and look at. Again, if you like this video today, please like, share, subscribe, ring the notification bell. It doesn't ring often on from this channel, I'll tell you that. And that tells me that you want more lore breakdowns and more extended lore videos. Remember that this universe never runs out of stories. There's always one page more. Until our next voyage, keep exploring.